Welcome, Herriman City. Good afternoon, and welcome to our City Council video recap from last night's meeting. It was, if you combine the work meeting and the general meeting, it was a bit of a late night. So
Very late night.
glad you made it, Councilmember Shields. We're gonna go over some of the things we saw in the general meeting. So let's hit a few of the items here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's start with, we had a couple different financial presentations. One was some amendments to the city's budget, and we anticipate a few throughout the year. This was the first one of this budget cycle. And we had a report from our auditor. So, but let's hit the budget amendment first. What was happening there? Why were some of those amendments made?
Yeah, it's really interesting thing about municipal finance, government finance, is that everything that is going to be brought into the city or goes out of the city has to be a part of a budget somewhere. If we had budgeted last year, which a lot of the things that we did last night were things that were budgeted in last year's fiscal budget, but because they weren't spent, the money had to be amended and moved into this year's budget so that it could be spent this year. And so there's a lot of housekeeping of those kind of items. Additionally, there are sources of additional revenue where we may have underestimated what sales tax revenue might have been. And so there's some additional revenue, and we have to allocate that to the budget appropriately, those kind of things. So most of it was housekeeping. I think the only real items of big note, the big chunk things, were some vehicle purchases that, because of supply chain issues that we're all aware of stemming from COVID, there's been a shortage of getting vehicles. So we couldn't get them last year. We moved that money forward. And then there's some things that we were going to buy next year, and we've brought some of that money backwards so that we can actually buy more vehicles in 2023 than we probably would have under a normal year.
Yeah, if only everything worked out nicely, as nicely as they do on a spreadsheet.
Right. Yeah, you get the spreadsheet, you work out the calendar, you're going to rotate all the vehicles through, and then you hit a snag where you can't get any new vehicles for a couple of years. It's a challenge.
Yeah. Let's go over the audit
Okay.
report. So every year the city goes through an audit. The city hires an independent auditor to go through all the financials to make sure everything is reported correctly. How did that turn out?
Excellent. It was interesting because we have had a change. Our previous finance manager retired. We hope he's doing well in his retirement, and excited about that. We have a new finance manager who took over kind of halfway through the budget process and through this audit process. So it was a good opportunity for the auditors to evaluate our financial statements a little different way, perhaps. Now, I want to be clear, they don't audit our internal practices and procedures and controls. That's a different kind of audit. They do an overview of those things. But they are looking at the material information that's included in the city's financial statements. Are they accurate? Do they clearly represent sources and uses of money, where all those things are going, how they were accounted for, how those are expended? And the results of the audit were very favorable. There weren't any major finding issues that are of concern to residents. We can proudly say that the money's being used well and appropriately and accounted for.
Always good news.
It is good news. I'm a taxpayer. I want to make sure it's being used right.
Me as well. Me as well. Let's skip ahead. We'll come back to another thing toward the end here, but a couple of voting items for last night. There were two in particular. One was a rezone within the Auto Mall project, if you wouldn't mind explaining what happened there.
So the Auto Mall is a large project, covers 60-something acres of land, all encompassed. But it was owned by numerous owners in small parcels. One of the recent parcels that were acquired was something that has been negotiated with UDOT for a number of years. It was finally resolved. The developer was able to acquire the land, and they wanted to make sure that we just included it in the Auto Mall zoning as has been planned all along. So it's, again, final execution of all of the pieces to make the plan go forward.
Yeah, so a bit of a formality, something we anticipated. We've been working for a long time to get to this point, but formality to help with the overall Auto Mall project.
Yeah, and there's one more little piece. that we have to obtain for part of the road that's going to connect into Mountain View. And so we'll have to do this again in a couple of months for these, tiny little pieces that we have to add.
But coming along nicely.
It is.
There's been a lot going into this Automall project, but it's I think moving in a positive direction.
Very much so. We've seen the architectural renderings for some of the first dealerships that are going in, and they are remarkable. I think the residents are going to be so pleased by the quality of construction, the visual attractiveness of what's going to be in there. It's going to be different than what they've seen at other auto malls.
Awesome. The other voting item dealt with residential treatment facilities, a text change to the city code. What were some of the changes there, and maybe the reasoning behind it?
Largely what we did was take a portion of our code that was under Chapter 10 and moved it into a different chapter, or different title, from Title 10 to Title 11. And it was mostly so that all of the issues related to this were clearly spelled out in its own section and accounted for that way. Primarily, we recognize that some changes in federal law required us to review and update some of the policies that exist in our city ordinances regarding residential treatment facilities. I know in the neighborhoods there's been a few questions about a couple of businesses that were operating, and I think that kind of spurred some of the questions. So city attorney went through and reviewed that, consulted with an outside expert on policies relating to disabled persons treatment facilities, residential businesses, all of the exceptions and rules that go into that. And we just codified all that with these changes.
Let's finish off with my personal favorite part of the night. I think a lot of people might agree with that. The Herriman Police had a badge presentation, as is tradition for new officers, even promoted officers. Right. What took place there? What was that like?
That is the best part of this job. If there's any good part, it is to see these great men and women who serve our city going through the ceremonial process of receiving their badge. The badge, the shield, is a symbol of their protecting the public, right? Their service of the public, and having that bestowed upon them in a ceremony brings to the forefront the importance of what they do and the recognition of that. So last night, some of the officers that have come on since the summer, the last time we did our badge presentation, as well as some that had been promoted, received their badges last night. And what's really neat is those badges are presented by the chief to usually a member of the family, a spouse, a girlfriend, in one case, one of their children. And the family comes up and they do it, and it's just a special experience to recognize not only the officers and the great work that they do, but the families that let us have these officers to serve our community, and the sacrifice that they make. We don't want to forget that in anything we do. So I always make sure we thank them and all that they do. But it was just a neat ceremony last night. Such a fun thing.
If you missed it, you can go on the city's YouTube or Facebook pages. There's video there. You can see all of them one by one. You can see the families behind all the officers. It was a really neat experience. So.
Yeah, big smiles. Just sometimes we get into budgets and finances and minuscule things that are so complicated and they take a long time. But this was just great. I wish we could just do that every meeting.
Definitely. Well, that's it for this edition of the City Council video recap. There will be a written recap on Herriman.org as well. And as always, you can go to our YouTube page or our Facebook page and go back and watch the meetings if you would like to. You can go to Herriman.org/agendas and minutes and find any of the information that was discussed in the meetings. It's all there. It's all available. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Councilmember Shields, for coming in and talking about the meeting.
Glad to be here. It was late night, but it was a good meeting.
So thank you. We'll catch you next time.